Today we'll be talking about antepartum fetal surveillance. So the logic behind fetal surveillance is that most fetal activities like movement, tone and breathing change with respect to fetal oxygenation and pH. So the presence of an abnormal fetal heart rate tracing could mean that there is a possible fetal hypoxemia or acidosis. So that is actually causing the fetus to adapt by change, and that causes a difference in the heart rate tracing. But you have to note that there can also be other factors that can lead to an abnormal fetal heart rate tracing, like fetal sleep, effects of various medications, thyroid abnormalities, which have to first be ruled out before saying that it's because of hypoxemia and acidosis. Now, the reason for these fetal heart rate tracing is basically an interplay between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Like, for example, uh, the fetal heart rate accelerations are actually caused by sympathetic drive. At this point, I'd also like to say that as the gestational age increases, the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems keep evolving. So that is why you find that in preterm babies or babies less than 28 weeks, you don't find the same amount of variability and heart rate accelerations as you find in um, fetus at a later gestation. So that's basically because it takes time for the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems to evolve. So when should an antepartum fetal surveillance be done? It's usually done when there are decreased fetal movements, preterm pre-labor rupture of membranes, vaginal bleeding to check for the fetal well-being, any pre-existing diabetes or gestational diabetes on treatment. Now here it is a GDM on treatment with either insulin or medications. A GDM which is where the sugar is well controlled on just dietary therapy, you don't require an antepartum fetal surveillance. Then hypertensive disorders, a whole spectrum, that's chronic hypertension, preeclampsia, eclampsia, then fetal growth restriction, twins, post-term pregnancies, oligohydramnios, polyhydramnios, all of these cases where you want to make sure that the fetal well-being is fine and the fetus is doing good. In these cases, we have to go for an antepartum fetal surveillance. Now, the methods for antepartum fetal surveillance, your fetal movement counting, which is not done much. But what we do now are the cardiotocographic methods, which includes the NST, that's non-stress test, biophysical profile, and contraction stress test. Coming to the non-stress test. Now, all these cardiotocographic methods are actually done using something called electronic fetal monitors, which will continuously record the fetal heart rate in a graphical form. So how it works is that an ultrasound beam is focused on the maternal abdomen, and the Doppler signals that are generated actually reflect the cardiac motion. So the Doppler signals actually create a waveform which is later analyzed by the machine and presented graphically, and that graphical form is what we see. Now, in a non-stress test, you have two results. First is a reactive, and the second is a non-reactive. You call an NST reactive when three criteria, that is, heart rate should be between 110 to 160 beats per minute. There should be more than equal to two accelerations. Each should be greater than 15 beats per minute, and each should last for more than 15 seconds. And this note is for a time period of 20 minutes. So more than equal to accelerations in 20 minutes. And there should be moderate variability, meaning 6 to 25 beats per minute. So if all three of these are there, it's a reactive NST. And if any of the above is absent, then you'll call it a non-reactive NST. So in this graph, this is an NST graphical representation. So here, the first thing that you see, it's not very clear, but the heart rate is between 110 to 160, and the variability is moderate variability. Around there is 6 to 25 beats per minute variability, and these are all the accelerations, which should be more than 15 beats per minute increase, and it should last for more than equal to 15 seconds. Similarly, in this picture, you can see that these are the accelerations lasting for more than 15 seconds, and you can also make out that it is a variable, moderate variability is also present. So these are two reactive NSTs. Now, what are the abnormalities in NST? So let's first look at the abnormalities in the rate. So tachycardia is when the rate is more than 160 beats per minute. That is seen in maternal fever. That can be because of chorioamnionitis and drugs like beta agonists, fetal hyperthyroidism, and any fetal congenital arrhythmias can also cause tachycardia. So as you can see in this picture, the heart rate is more than 160. Here it's 180. Now the second is bradycardia, and bradycardia can be because of maternal hypothermia. So just like fever causes tachy, hypothermia causes brady. Beta blockers and heart block, that is neonatal SLE. So in the presence of SSA, that is anti-Ro and anti-La antibodies, they the presence of those antibodies in the mother can lead to neonatal SLE and heart block, and this heart block presents as a bradycardia. Also, fetal hypothyroidism can cause bradycardia. Next are the abnormalities related to variability. So the normal is moderate variability of 6 to 25, and the abnormal is if that variability is absent or minimum. That is seen in case of CNS depressants like opioids, narcotics, in infant sleep. Now, when fetal sleep, so when the fetus is asleep, there is not much variability in the heart rate tracing, and usually the sleep period is around 40 minutes. So usually if it's a reactive NST, if you just prolong the NST so that for more than 40 minutes, so that it's covering that time of fetal sleep, then you can usually exclude the cause of exclude sleep as a cause of variability, because after 40 minutes, if you find that it is still minimally variable, then it is something more serious. Then prematurity. Now, as I've already mentioned, premature fetuses, the sympathetic axis is immature, it is only developing, so the variability will be minimum, and also hypoxia. Now, interpretation of an NST. So, what will you do if the NST is non reactive? The first thing, you extend the test for 40 to 120 minutes, that is to cover the fetal sleep period. So, even after 40 minutes, if you find that it is still minimally variable or non reactive, that is when you have to start worrying. The second thing you can do is to perform a vibroacoustic stimulation. So what you do basically is you keep a vibroacoustic source over the maternal abdomen. That source is actually going to stimulate a fetal movement, and that fetal movement is going to be seen as an acceleration. So if that is there, you know the NST is fine. So it's not much of a problem. And the third thing is you have to confirm a non-reactive NST with a biophysical profile or a CST. The reason is because if your NST comes out to be reactive, then that is great, because a reactive NST has a high negative predictive value. Meaning, if your NST is reactive, it means the fetus does not have hypoxia or acidosis. But if there is a non-reactive tracing, that has high false positive result, because it can be because of other reasons as well. So you have to confirm that with either a biophysical profile or a contraction stress test. Coming to the biophysical profile. So what exactly is this? This is actually an NST combined with an ultrasound. And there are 5 criteria under the biophysical profile, and a positive criteria gets 2 points and negative gets 0. So your final result will just be even numbers. A biophysical profile is done over 30 minutes. So the criteria for in the BPP is is NST, so it has to be a reactive NST, that gets 2 points. Second is using the ultrasound, we measure the amniotic fluid volume, and the normal result for this is that the single vertical fluid pocket should be more than 2 centimeters, or the amniotic fluid index should be greater than 5. If this is present, then this gets a score of 2. The third criteria is fetal movements. There should be at least 3 body movements in 30 minutes that we measure, so that gets a 2. And then fetal tone. There should be at least one flexion or extension of the limbs or the spine. So if that's present in 30 minutes, then that gets 2. And the last criteria is a fetal breathing movement. There should at least be one breathing episode, and each breathing episode should last at least for 30 seconds. So if this is there, that gets a 2. So this is the criteria for the biophysical profile. Interpretation of the BPP: a normal BPP is a score of 8 or 10. Abnormal BPP is a score of 0, 2 or 4. And a score of 6 means the BPP is equivocal. An abnormal BPP means that there is a risk for fetal demise, and that would warrant a delivery. And if it's a normal BPP, then just reassurance is enough. But if you get an equivocal BPP, that has to be followed up with a contraction stress test. So what is the contraction stress test? So what we do here is that the fetal heart rate tracing is observed after we induce contractions. How do we do that? By doing oxytocin infusion or by nipple stimulation. We induce contractions until we get 3 contractions in 10 minutes. Now, what is a normal and an abnormal CST? A normal CST means an absence of late decelerations or recurrent variable decelerations. I'll be talking about this soon. So you do not want any late deceleration, you do not want any recurrent variable decelerations. Then you'll say it's normal. And when is it abnormal? It is abnormal when late decelerations are seen in most of the contractions, in more than 50% of the contractions. If it's associated with late decelerations, that's an abnormal CST. Now, you have to note that a contraction stress test is contraindicated in all those conditions where labor is contraindicated, because you're essentially stimulating contractions of the uterus. So it should not be done in case of placenta previa, a prior classic cesarean section, or a prior extensive myomectomy where labor is contraindicated. Okay, so coming to the 3 main abnormal finding. Two main abnormal findings, because early deceleration is essentially benign, it is normal finding. And what is an early deceleration? So how do you identify it is that in this picture, with every uterine contraction concurrent with it, you have a deceleration. So these decelerations, the onset of the deceleration is gradual, so that's more than 30 seconds of the onset is present, and the nadir of the deceleration corresponds with the peak of the contraction, and these are concurrent with the decelerations are concurrent with the uterine contraction. So these are 3 important things. Now, why does this happen? This happens because when the fetal head moves down, it can get compressed, and that compression can result in an autonomic response. The compression causes a change in the intracranial pressure and a change in the cerebral blood flow, and that can actually create an autonomic response, that is a parasympathetic response that essentially leads to a deceleration. Alright, so as I mentioned, it's concurrent with the contraction and it has a gradual onset. So in this picture you see that it has a more than 30-second onset to nadir. These are early decelerations, they're benign, nothing has to be done. The second is variable decelerations. Now, how do you identify these? You have to know that variable decelerations are not associated with contractions. They will just occur randomly, and they have an abrupt onset of less than 30 seconds. The onset here is quite abrupt, and the amplitude of this deceleration reduces by more than 15 beats per minute. It lasts for more than 15 seconds, but it is less than 2 minutes. Alright, I'll tell you what significance that has in a minute. So, in the picture you can see that the onset of the variable deceleration is less than 30 seconds, and it usually can occur anywhere. It does not have to be concurrent with the contractions. Now, why do these variable decelerations occur? They are generally seen in a cord compression. So what happens is that So whenever there is a transient compression, initially, because umbilical veins are not as have thin walls compared to the arteries, the veins get compressed first. So that reduces the blood flow in the umbilical veins, and that causes hypotension because the fetus receives its blood supply through the umbilical vein. So that gets compressed, means the fetus doesn't get a blood flow, so that leads to hypotension. The hypotension initially causes a baroreceptor response that will increase the sympathetic outflow and a reflex rise in heart rate initially, and that is called a shoulder. But what happens later is that when the compression occurs completely, such that the umbilical artery is also now compressed, that can result in increased systemic vascular resistance. Increased SVR, again by baroreceptor response, will lead to parasympathetic outflow that is what causes the bradycardia and the deceleration. Alright. So basically it is because of the transient compression of the umbilical cord. Now, what happens in cord prolapse? That's a bit different, because in cord prolapse, it's not a transient compression. It is a prolonged compression of the cord. So it is a sustained compression without any decompression. So you will essentially get a sustained deceleration in case of a cord prolapse. So that's the difference between cord prolapse and cord compression. Now, at this junction, I would also like to talk about something called a prolonged deceleration. In prolonged deceleration, the amplitude reduces by more than 15 heart beats per minute, but it lasts for more than 2 minutes. Variable lasts for less than 2 minutes, but prolonged deceleration lasts for more than 2 minutes, although less than 10 minutes. Now, this would occur when there is a interruption of fetal oxygenation for a very long period of time. That can be again due to cord prolapse or a maternal hypoxemia or low cardiac output in the mother. That will cause a prolonged deceleration that lasts for more than 2 minutes. Alright. So the most ominous one is the late deceleration. How do you identify this? A late deceleration comes after the peak of contraction. It naders after the end of the contraction, and it has a slow onset of more than 30 seconds. So if you look at this picture, so this is the peak of contraction, and you find that the onset of the late deceleration essentially occurs at or right after the peak of the contraction. The onset is slow, more than 30 seconds, and the nadir is actually reached after the end of the contraction, or at the end of the contraction is where the nadir is reached. Alright, so the same thing can be seen here, where the contraction essentially occurs, the deceleration essentially occurs after the contraction. Now, what are the causes of late deceleration? The causes are uteroplacental insufficiency, uterine tachysystole. So what happens here? So, for example, in case, normally what happens is whenever there is a uterine contraction, during the diastolic blood flow in the mother, as a mother's heart beats, in the diastolic phase, the diastolic blood flow to the fetus will reduce whenever there is uterine contraction. That will reduce the fetal oxygenation. But in a normal fetus, where all the blood vessels supplying the fetus are normal, because the fetal blood is actually fetal hemoglobin, which has high affinity for oxygen, that hemoglobin can essentially compensate for this transient hypoxemia. But whenever there is any placental vascular insufficiency, or if there are excessive uterine contractions like tachysystole, then during the contraction the fetus does not get enough oxygen, and the fetal partial pressure of oxygen falls way too low. When that happens, the response of hypoxia in the fetus is a sympathetic response, and that sympathetic response to hypoxemia will cause a vasoconstriction of the blood vessels in the fetus, so that all the blood can actually be shunted to the vital organs like the brain. But what happens in the process is that the high peripheral vascular resistance will activate the baroreceptors. The baroreceptors will cause an increased parasympathetic outflow, and that is what leads to this bradycardia and the deceleration. And after the contraction gets over and the oxygenation of the fetus comes back to normal, your tracing goes back to baseline. right? So this is the gist of why late decelerations happen. So basically, it's that transient hypoxemia that occurs due to the uterine contractions in the setting of a uteroplacental insufficiency or a vascular insufficiency or excessive contractions of the uterus. Now, finally, we can divide the fetal heart rate tracings into various categories, and the management depends on that. Category 1 is a benign good finding. Basically, it's a baseline heart rate of 110 to 160, moderate variability of 6 to 25 beats per minute. There are no late decelerations, no variable decelerations. You may find early decelerations, which are fine, they're normal, no problem, and accelerations may or may not be present. This is category 1, and this is a, a good finding. It's not a bad finding. Category 3 is ominous, and category 3 denotes an abnormal acid base status in the fetus which requires immediate management. So, category 3 is defined as one where you have a sinusoidal pattern. So, this is a sinusoidal pattern that is seen in the picture. That is a very bad sign. So, just the presence of a sinusoidal pattern means it goes into category 3. Or absent variability with one of the following, either recurrent late decelerations or recurrent variable decelerations or a bradycardia. So that means a fetus, the tracing is put as category 3, and that is ominous. Category 2 includes all the others that don't fall under category 1 and category 3. How do you manage these categories? Category 1, as I mentioned, is benign, just reassurance to the mother is all that is needed. In category 2 and 3, the first thing to do is something called in utero resuscitation. So, first is you reposition the mother either into a, like usually it's into a left lateral position. So, what you're doing is that you are removing the compression of the IVC, you're increasing the venous return, thereby increasing the cardiac output and increasing maternal perfusion and therefore fetal perfusion as well. So, that's the first thing. Second is to give IV fluids. Third is to discontinue uterotonic drugs like oxytocin, because that the contractions are the one that is reducing the fetal blood supply and oxygen. Give tocolytics. Again, if there is excessive contractions, you can give tocolytics like calcium channel blockers like nifedipine or terbutaline can be given. Amnio infusion is usually given for variable deceleration. So variable decelerations are because of cord compression. So when you infuse saline, or basically you're increasing, when you infuse saline, what you're doing is you are removing the compression on the cord by acting as a cushion. The fluid acts as a cushion and removes the compression on the cord, so that in some cases can reverse the variable deceleration. And if it is a prolapsed umbilical cord, then what you should do is you have to elevate that presenting part, and you have to while elevating the presenting part, you should also look for immediate delivery. So that is the first thing that you do in utero resuscitation. If this is unsuccessful, all of these methods are unsuccessful, then expedite delivery. And whenever you get a sinusoidal pattern, immediate delivery has to be done, because that is a very bad sign. So that is the management of the various categories, and that's about antepartum fetal surveillance. Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed it.